Agatha Raisin and The Grave the Dog Uncovered. Dear listeners, welcome to tonight's mystery. I'm Sam, your host, and I'm delighted to have you join me for another captivating tale. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you tuning in from tonight? Are you relaxing at home, on the go, or somewhere a bit unexpected? Share your answer in the comments. I always enjoy hearing from our wonderful community. And do not forget to like and subscribe me for more mysteries every day. Now, let's get cozy and dive into tonight's story. Chapter 1. A Quiet Morning, a Troubled Dog. Agatha Raisin valued her mornings the way some people treasured heirlooms, carefully, possessively, and with a silent warning to the world not to disturb them. On this particular Carsely morning, the village lay under a soft veil of golden light, the kind that made even cracked pavements and leaning hedges look picturesque. Agatha stepped out into her garden with a mug of strong coffee, inhaling the crisp air, as though it were a reward for surviving another week of village gossip. It should have been an ordinary start. Birds chirped, distant lawnmowers hummed. Nothing, absolutely nothing suggested that her peace was about to be intruded upon. That was exactly when Pippin arrived. Mrs. Blocksby's tiny terrier burst through the garden gate like a furry missile, skidding across the stones before crashing into Agatha's legs. He wasn't his usual cheerful, biscuit-seeking self. Instead, he trembled violently, eyes wide, tail tucked so tightly it nearly disappeared. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Pippin," Agatha muttered, steadying herself. "If you're here to demand breakfast, you've chosen the wrong woman." But Pippin wasn't begging. He let out a sharp, urgent bark, one that didn't match his size or temperament, then darted a few paces away and looked back at her expectantly. When she didn't immediately follow, he ran back, circled her feet, and tugged at the cuff of her trousers with surprising insistence. "Oh," Agatha sighed, "you cannot possibly be serious." He tugged harder. The peaceful morning had officially been murdered. With a final dramatic sip of her coffee, she set the mug aside. "Fine, lead the way, you pint-sized menace." Pippin bolted toward the far end of the garden, the place Agatha rarely visited, except to scowl at weeds or pretend she would one day plant roses. The dog stopped beside the old stone wall, a patchwork of moss, age, and stubbornness that had stood long before Agatha arrived in Carsely. His paws scraped frantically at the soil, sending clumps flying. "Stop that!" Agatha hissed, glancing over her shoulder, as though the entire women's society might materialize just to judge her. But Pippin ignored her completely. His digging grew faster, more frantic, and the sound, rapid claws against earth, echoed strangely in the stillness. The morning air seemed to hold its breath as Agatha stepped closer, uncertain but determined to find out what had unsettled the dog. Agatha hesitated, scanning the quiet garden as if expecting someone to leap out from behind a hedge and accuse her of meddling, but there was no one. Only the rustling leaves, the faint chatter of distant neighbors, and the soft thud of Pippin's paws as he resumed his digging with renewed urgency. Something about the scene felt wrong, in a way she couldn't yet define. It wasn't just a dog acting strangely, it was a disturbance in the calm rhythm of Carsely, itself subtle but unmistakable. As she crouched to pull him back, a peculiar, uneasy feeling curled at the base of her spine. The dog wasn't acting out. He was trying to show her something. And though Agatha had absolutely no intention of being dragged into anyone's problems before breakfast, her instincts, those stubborn, inconvenient instincts, nudged her to look. The soil beneath Pippin's paws shifted, revealing the edge of something that didn't quite belong. Not a bone, not a toy. Something flatter, darker, pressed into the earth as if deliberately hidden. Agatha's breath caught. She leaned in despite herself, despite knowing very well that these moments were precisely what disrupted peaceful lives and pulled women like her into situations involving police reports, nosy villagers, and far too much walking. Something was waiting beneath that dirt. Agatha felt her pulse quicken, and Pippin, trembling but insistent, had made sure she found it first. Agatha wasn't the sort of woman who enjoyed rummaging around in dirt. She generally preferred mysteries that involved clean paperwork,
tidy interviews, and the occasional dramatic confrontation carried out while wearing her best heels. Yet here she was, kneeling on damp soil beside a dog who seemed convinced that salvation, or doom, lay just beneath her begonias. Pippin continued digging with desperate determination, panting hard, his small body quivering, as if some instinct older than memory guided him. Each swipe of his paws cleared away another thin layer of earth. Agatha watched for a moment, torn between annoyance and a faint, unwelcome curiosity. Finally, she pressed her hand to his flank. "All right, that's enough," she murmured. "Let me see what you're so worked up about." The dog stepped aside reluctantly, tail twitching anxiously. Agatha leaned forward, brushing soil away with careful, hesitant strokes. She expected a root or a stone, maybe even a long-forgotten gardening tool, but certainly nothing extraordinary. The earth was soft, more so than she remembered. It crumbled under her fingertips, revealing the edge of something hard and curved. She blinked, brushing faster. A wooden handle emerged, pale and splintered from years underground. It jutted upward at an odd angle, not quite upright, not quite lying flat, as though someone had jammed it into the soil and then thought better of it. Agatha froze, her breath catching. She lifted more dirt, her heart thudding with an unsettling mix of intrigue and dread. It wasn't just a handle. It was attached to a shovel, an old one, its metal blade hidden completely beneath the earth. She stared at it, stunned. A shovel buried in her garden made no sense. She hadn't placed it there, and I doubted the previous homeowner had a habit of hiding tools like buried treasure. Agatha reached out, touching the wooden handle lightly. It felt wrong, out of place, too carefully positioned. Tools left outdoors rusted, toppled, or vanished into sheds. They weren't buried like secrets, and yet this one had been tucked neatly into the ground as though someone hoped it wouldn't be found. "Well, this is peculiar," she whispered. Pippin whined softly, nudging the handle with his nose. Agatha withdrew her hand, narrowing her eyes. She noticed the soil beneath the tool seemed looser than the surrounding ground, freshly disturbed, recently manipulated. She straightened slowly, letting her gaze travel along the stone wall bordering her garden. At first glance it looked unchanged. Old stones, mossy patches, a small vine creeping along the base. But when she stepped closer, something caught the light. Thin, pale scratches etched against one stone. They weren't natural marks or chips. They were deliberate, purposeful, dragged by something hard, maybe by a metal blade. Agatha's pulse quickened. Someone had been here. Someone had dug, scraped, and hidden something in or near this very spot. Her mind churned with possibilities, none of them comforting. The peaceful charm of Carsely, the warm sunlit cottages, the friendly nods of neighbors, the quiet routines felt suddenly layered over something darker. Pippin pressed against her leg, trembling again. She looked down at him, finally understanding that his panic wasn't random. Dogs didn't dig up shovels unless something told them to. Some scent, some disturbance, something beneath the surface. Agatha exhaled slowly, studying the ground, the tool, the scratches, the air itself as if it might hold whispers. A shovel buried at an angle, recently disturbed soil, hidden evidence, someone leaving behind a sign, or hiding one. "This isn't an accident," she murmured. She didn't know what she'd stumbled into, but one thing was certain. Something had happened here, and Pippin had dragged her straight to the first clue.
Chapter 2. The Whisper Beneath the Soil. Agatha hadn't planned on marching to the vicarage first thing in the morning, but the buried shovel lingered in her mind like an unanswered riddle. The quiet charm of Carsely seemed thinner today, stretched over something she couldn't quite name. Pippin trotted beside her, unusually alert, ears flicking at every sound. When she reached the vicarage gate, she hesitated only a moment before pushing it open and heading toward Mrs. Bloxby's garden door.
The vicar's wife appeared almost instantly, as though she had been waiting. "Agatha," she greeted, her voice warm but strained. "You're out early. I had a disturbance. Your dog ambushed me and dug up something rather bizarre." Mrs. Blocksby's eyebrows lifted. "Pippin? What on earth did he find?" "A shovel, buried in my garden, and not by accident." Agatha watched carefully for the reaction she suspected would come. Sure enough, a flicker, quick but unmistakable, passed across Mrs. Blocksby's face. "Oh," Mrs. Blocksby said softly, though the word carried a weight that didn't match its simplicity. She reached to smooth her apron but stopped halfway, fingers trembling just slightly. "How very odd." "Odd enough that I thought you'd want to know," Agatha pressed. She wasn't one for subtlety. "Your dog acted like he'd found the crown jewels, or a disaster." Mrs. Blocksby glanced toward the side gate, the one leading to the vicarage's small orchard. Her voice lowered. "Sometimes animals notice things we overlook." Agatha raised a brow. "Such as?" Mrs. Blocksby hesitated, her gaze drifting back to Agatha's. There was conflict there, curiosity battling caution. "There's an old story," she admitted. "Nothing more than a village whisper, really. You know how tales grow in small places." "What kind of tale?" Agatha asked, leaning forward. "A legend," Mrs. Blocksby said with a sigh. "A hidden grave, long forgotten, supposedly connected to a family scandal long before either of us arrived in Carsely." She forced a gentle smile, but it wavered at the edges. "It's only gossip, Agatha. Old nonsense, not something you should trouble yourself with." Agatha folded her arms more tightly. "You're discouraging me," she said, "which is usually a sign that you're afraid I'll discover something." Mrs. Blocksby shook her head, but her eyes betrayed her. "Agatha, please. Some matters are better left untouched." She spoke lightly, yet the strain in her tone revealed a deeper worry. "These stories only cause fear." Pippin suddenly growled. The low rumble surprised them both. He stood at the side gate, stiff and unsettled, staring at a narrow gap between the boards as though something inside frightened him. Mrs. Blocksby paled. "He never growls," she whispered. Agatha watched the dog carefully. His hackles rose, his small frame tense. Something near the orchard disturbed him, though Agatha heard nothing but wind brushing the leaves. The moment stretched uncomfortably before Pippin backed away, whimpering. "What exactly is in that orchard?" "Fruit trees," Mrs. Blocksby answered quickly. Too quickly. "Nothing more." Agatha stepped closer to her. "I don't believe you're hiding fruit." Mrs. Blocksby pressed her hands together, eyes closing for a moment. When she opened them, the warm composure she usually carried had thinned. "Please," she said softly, "let this go. Sometimes looking for answers invites trouble we don't need." Agatha felt her detective instinct spark like struck flint. "Trouble tends to show up whether I invite it or not." Mrs. Blocksby didn't argue. Agatha turned to leave, Pippin trotting at her heel. As she stepped through the vicarage gate, she looked back once more. Mrs. Blocksby stood frozen in the doorway, worry etched into her gentle features. It wasn't the look of someone dismissing a silly rumor. It was the look of someone afraid a legend had already begun to wake.
Agatha returned to her cottage with the unsettled energy of someone who'd heard half a warning, but not the part that mattered. Mrs. Blocksby's trembling voice echoed faintly in her memory. A legend, a scandal, best left alone. But Agatha had never been the sort to leave anything alone, especially when someone advised her to, and certainly not when a dog had practically dragged her to a clue. The late afternoon sunlight had thinned into a cool, mist-tinged gold by the time she stepped into her garden. Birds rustled in the hedges, as if whispering among themselves about her earlier discovery. Pippin wasn't with her now. She'd walked him back to the vicarage, where Mrs. Blocksby had accepted him with almost guilty haste. Something in her eyes had flickered when Agatha asked if he often behaved that way. The vicar's wife had insisted he never did. Agatha exhaled sharply and strode toward the part of the garden where the shovel had been unearthed. The ground looked even more disturbed than she remembered. Soil, darker than the surrounding earth, clumped together in uneven mounds. She crouched and tilted her head, trying to view it the way a detective might. From this angle, the messy pile resolved into shapes, indentations, slight compressions, and faint impressions left behind by something or someone. A footprint, then another. She moved closer, careful not to disturb them further. They were small prints, light but unmistakable, pressed just deeply enough that she could trace the curve of a heel and the narrowing toward the toe. Whoever had been here had stepped gingerly, as if trying not to be noticed. Small feet, perhaps a woman or a teenager, Agatha murmured to herself. The thought rippled uneasily through her. There weren't many teenagers in Carsely, and the ones who lived here couldn't be bothered with nighttime garden visits or burying shovels. A woman, though, a villager with secrets. The Cotswolds had plenty of those. A cool breeze swept across her cheek, carrying with it the earthy scent of upturned soil. Agatha straightened and scanned the stone wall. She let her fingertips skim the cold surface. The scratches she'd noticed earlier looked even sharper now. Fresh, pale fragments where stone had scraped clean against something metallic or forcefully dragged. Deliberate, she whispered. Someone was doing something here. The day's light began to wane, shadows stretching long across the garden as twilight crept over Carsely. The sky turned a soft lavender gray. Lamps flickered on in distant cottage windows, glowing like warm hearths through the mist. Usually this hour soothed her. The gentle settling of village life, the quiet promise of a peaceful evening. Tonight, it only sharpened her awareness. She felt watched. At first, it was just a prickling at the back of her neck, the subtle shift in the air that made her straighten. Agatha turned her head slowly, unwilling to appear startled. Her gaze drifted toward the narrow footpath that curved around the side of her cottage, a path mostly used by villagers cutting through toward the green. Something moved. A figure, tallish, wrapped in shadow, stood just beyond the hazy reach of the nearest lamp, not close enough for her to see a face, but close enough that she felt the weight of someone's attention. Agatha took one step forward, purposeful and silent. The silhouette jerked, then slipped back into the darkness, retreating with practiced ease. No hurried footsteps, no rustle of panic, just a quiet vanishing, as if the night swallowed them whole. Agatha's pulse flickered uneasily, but her jaw set with determination. So, someone was here, she murmured to herself. Her gaze drifted back to the wall, the footprints, the freshly disturbed earth. Someone had buried something here long ago. Someone had returned recently. Someone didn't want her looking too closely. And now, someone was watching her. Agatha folded her arms, a familiar spark of challenge lighting behind her eyes. Whatever lay beneath this soil, legend, scandal, secret, or warning, she intended to uncover it, no matter who stood in the shadows waiting.
Chapter 3. Rumors in Carsely. The Red Lion glowed like a warm ember against the cool Carsely evening, its windows fogged with the promise of chatter, clinking glasses, and the comforting scent of roasted potatoes and buttered bread. Normally, Agatha welcomed the noise. The small-town hum, the gossip, the sly comments passed with pints in hand. Tonight, however, she stepped through the wooden door with a sharper purpose. The moment she entered, voices dipped in volume. Not by much, just enough for her to sense that she'd walked into the middle of something. Or perhaps because of something. Agatha paused, scanning the cluster of familiar faces. The regulars sat in their usual places. Mr. Green with his crossword, Daisy Brown with her floral scarf, and a trio of retirees arguing about football as if national pride depended on it. She made her way to an empty stool at the bar, where Fred Jessup, the landlord, polished a glass already gleaming. Avon and Agatha. His tone was casual, but his eyes flicked ever so briefly toward a corner booth before returning to her. Quiet night. Quiet never lasts in Carsely. Not with the sort of things I've been hearing. Fred's eyebrow twitched, but before he could respond, Daisy Brown leaned toward her from 2 stools down. "Oh, Agatha, you did hear, didn't you, about the man, the one lurking near your cottage?" Agatha didn't flinch, but she felt the entire pub lean in with subtle anticipation. "I might have heard something, but not enough." Mr. Green snorted. "No one knows much. He comes, he goes, shows up where he shouldn't." "What did he look like?" Agatha asked. "Tallish, dark coat, kept to the shadows, like someone who didn't want to be recognized." "That's only half the story," Fred added, sliding a small cider toward her. "People say he's been asking questions." Agatha's gaze sharpened. "What kind of questions?" Fred leaned forward, elbows on the bar. "Property lines." That stirred the pub again. Hushed murmurs, clinking glasses, the rustle of unease. "Old ones," Fred clarified, "before most of us moved here. Curious sort of thing to inquire about, wouldn't you say?" "Curious indeed," Agatha murmured. The stone wall flashed in her mind, the scratches, the footprints, the disturbed soil. "And," Daisy added, lowering her voice so dramatically she nearly slid off her stool, "they say he was carrying a small spade." "A spade?" Agatha browed. Daisy nodded vigorously. "Small enough to tuck under a coat, but no one brings a spade unless they're digging something up." "Or burying something," Mr. Green muttered into his crossword. A brief, heavy silence followed. Agatha tapped her fingers lightly on the bar. "Has anyone spoken to him, heard his voice?" "Only Bill Paterson," Fred said. "Saw the man near the old footpath at dusk. Said he asked if the land behind your place was ever divided differently. Old disputes, old boundaries, that sort of thing." "Old disputes," Agatha repeated softly. That echoed too closely with Mrs. Blocksby's cryptic mention of a long-forgotten scandal. The villagers exchanged glances, some curious, some worried, all uneasy. Daisy spoke again, this time with a tremor. "Agatha, dear, if he's poking around your garden, maybe you ought to stay inside at night." "Oh, nonsense," Agatha said, though even she wasn't fully certain. "I simply want to know who he is and what business he has with property lines." Fred put down his glass and looked her squarely in the eye. "Be careful, Agatha. Men who hide in the dark usually aren't looking for friendly conversation." She left the pub with the echo of Fred's warning trailing behind her. The streets were quiet, the mist low, the lamps glowing like lone sentinels, and though she couldn't see anyone following her, Agatha felt that uneasy tug again. A silent confirmation. The stranger wasn't merely wandering, he was searching, and somehow that search led straight to her garden.
Agatha didn't wait until morning. The moment she shut her cottage door behind her, she reached for the phone and dialed Bill Wong. She tried to keep her voice steady as she relayed the details: the shovel, the disturbed soil, the stranger with the spade, the whispers at the pub. Bill arrived 20 minutes later, his car crunching over the gravel with a familiar sound that usually meant reassurance. He stepped out wearing his usual calm expression, though Agatha could see a tightness around his mouth. "You said it was urgent?" "Come in," she said, leading him to the sitting room. Pippin, who'd been curled on a cushion, jolted upright at the sight of Bill and trotted over, tail stiff. Agatha took a breath and launched into the full explanation. Bill listened without interrupting, hands folded, eyes unreadable. When she finished, he let out a long, slow exhale. "Agatha," he said carefully, "you should have called me earlier. That's what everyone keeps saying, but I didn't know it was anything serious until the villagers started talking." Bill leaned back, gaze drifting toward the window. "There were old cases," he said, choosing his words. "Not official investigations, exactly. More like rumors that found their way into the station logs. Decades ago, long before either of us were here." "Rumors about what?" "Disputes," Bill said simply. "Arguments over who owned certain plots. Not your cottage specifically, but the land stretching behind it. There were suggestions, just suggestions, that something valuable had been buried during the war. Money, Documents, heirlooms, no one either agreed, but there were fights over it, nasty ones. Agatha blinked. Buried valuables, and no one dug them up? There's no proof anything was ever buried, Bill reminded her. The police never found anything, but people believed the rumors enough to make trouble. The records are vague, scraps of interviews, complaints filed, nothing ever confirmed. And now a stranger is asking about property lines? With a spade? That's what concerns me. These old stories have a way of resurfacing when someone thinks there's a chance to profit, but it doesn't explain why he's near your garden. Agatha folded her arms. You think someone believes there's still something hidden here? Maybe, maybe not, but I'd like you to tread carefully. If this man is desperate, or if he thinks he has some old claim, he could become unpredictable. Before Agatha could respond, Pippin shot to his feet with a sharp bark, tense as a coiled spring. His ears pricked toward the window, overlooking the hedgerow. Another bark, louder, more urgent. Agatha froze. Bill stood immediately, one hand raised in a quieting gesture. Stay here. A faint rustling carried through the night. Leaves shivered. A twig cracked. Bill moved to the window, parting the curtain just enough to peer outside. Agatha held her breath. Pippin growled low in his throat. Then, movement. A dark shape bolted past the hedgerow, the outline too quick to identify. Bill reacted instantly, rushing for the door. Agatha followed him onto the garden path as the figure disappeared down the narrow footway leading toward the lane. "Did you see him?" she asked. "Not well, but someone was definitely here, watching, listening." Pippin barked once more, then fell silent, nose pressed to the ground as if trying to track a fading scent. Bill turned back to Agatha, all traces of his usual calm replaced with a more serious tone. "This isn't just gossip anymore. Someone is keeping an eye on you and on whatever lies in this garden." Agatha swallowed, the cool night suddenly feeling sharper. "Then we need to find out why." "We will, but be cautious. Whoever that was, they didn't want to be seen." And as the night deepened around them, Agatha sensed the mystery tightening, quietly, decisively, around her garden, her cottage, and her own name.
Chapter 4. The Grave Revealed. Sleep refused to come. Agatha turned on her mattress, flipped her pillow, then stared at the faint outline of the ceiling as the hours crept silently by. Outside, Carsely lay still under a milky veil of moonlight, the sort of calm that usually lulled her into deep rest. But not tonight. Every time she closed her eyes, the image of the disturbed soil returned, the loosened earth, the faint marks of someone's boots, the fleeing shadow disappearing through her hedgerow. At last she sat upright. "Oh, bother this," she muttered, grabbing her dressing gown. If someone else was poking around her garden in the dead of night, she wasn't going to lie here pretending to sleep. She lit a lantern, its warm glow soft and steady, and stepped outside. The night greeted her with a gentle chill, carrying the scent of grass, mist, and the unmistakable smell of turning soil. Pippin, who had been sleeping in a basket near her kitchen door, padded out behind her and let out a low whine. "Don't start again," she whispered, though she felt comforted by his presence. "Just help me keep watch." Her slippers brushed over the dew-covered lawn as she moved toward the corner of the garden where everything had begun. The lantern's glow cast trembling shadows along the stone wall. For a moment she thought everything looked as she left it, but then her breath caught. The soil had shifted. Not much, not enough for a casual passerby to notice, but she saw it immediately. A slight hollowing, a subtle scrape, the faintest mound where there hadn't been one before. Someone had come back. Agatha knelt, pushing aside a strand of hair that had escaped her bun. The lantern flickered over the dark earth, catching on something she hadn't noticed earlier. Fresh ridges, not paw prints, not her own hand marks. Someone had dug here again. "What in heaven's name?" she murmured. Pippin sniffed the ground intensely, then pawed once at the soil before stepping back, tail tucked, ears pressed flat. His unease only sharpened hers.
Agatha set the lantern beside her and brushed away the loose earth. Her fingers met a rough edge, wooden. She froze. Beneath the surface lay a board, a rectangular piece, old and darkened with age, but surprisingly intact. A thin layer of dirt clung to its grain, smudging her fingertips. Someone had buried this deliberately. She cleared more soil, breathing carefully. The board stretched wider than she'd expected, fitted flush against the earth as though it'd been placed with care. And beneath it, she sensed a hollow space. A faint smell drifted up. Damp earth, stale air locked away too long, something old enough that even the moonlight seemed reluctant to touch it. Pippin whimpered. Agatha swallowed. "All right," she whispered to herself, steadying her nerves. "It's only wood. Could be covering anything. A rabbit burrow, an old storage pit, a century-old compost heap." But her words lacked conviction. She lifted one corner. The board resisted, stuck fast, as if clinging to the ground. She strained a bit harder, and with a soft crack, the edge pried free. Cold air drifted up, brushing her face like a sigh from another time. She held the lantern closer. Below the board wasn't clutter, or roots, or natural hollows. It was space, an intentional cavity, large enough to hide something of significance. Agatha's heart thudded in a rhythm that felt both chilling and thrilling. This wasn't a random patch of disturbed soil. Someone had dug with purpose, carefully, secretly, and covered their work with a board that had rested here long enough to sink into the ground. Someone wanted whatever's down there to stay there, she whispered. The lantern's glow trembled across the opening, revealing only darkness. Pippin backed away, tail low. Agatha inhaled, the smell of old earth thick in the air. A realization shivered through her. This wasn't a forgotten corner of her garden. It was a hiding place. And someone, whether the stranger or someone far older, had gone to great lengths to ensure its contents remained unseen. Tonight, that secrecy had finally cracked open.
Agatha's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the edge of the wooden board. The night was silent, but for the soft rustle of leaves and the occasional distant hoot of an owl. She drew a deep breath, bracing herself. Whatever lay beneath had been hidden deliberately, meant to remain untouched, forgotten. Yet here she was, about to confront it. With a careful, strained effort, she lifted the board. It gave with a creak that sounded louder than it should have, echoing against the walls of her garden in the still night. Beneath it was a hollow, lined with damp earth that smelled of time and secrecy. At the center rested a small, battered box, wrapped in a cloth so rotten that it flaked at her touch. The box seemed almost to hum with its own history, quiet but insistent. Agatha's hands hovered over the photograph. She studied the woman's face. There was something about it, something familiar that tugged at a corner of her memory. She frowned, tilting the picture in the lantern's glow. The features, the expression. She had seen this face somewhere in Carsely before, but where? She couldn't yet place it. The pocket watch she set aside, noting its weight and the way rust had eaten into the metal. The key she turned over in her fingers, small but carefully crafted. Every item seemed ordinary alone, yet together they formed a puzzle. Someone had buried these objects deliberately, protecting them from discovery, leaving behind a trace of a story that clearly had not wanted to be told. Her thoughts whirled, piecing possibilities together, when a sound froze her blood. Footsteps, soft, measured, crunched on the grass near the garden edge. Agatha's pulse spiked. She dropped the key back into the box and held her breath. The footsteps halted, too deliberate to be casual. Someone was standing nearby, watching, perhaps waiting for her to discover the secret. Pippin stiffened beside her, growling low in his throat. The lantern trembled slightly in Agatha's hand. She glanced toward the hedgerow where shadows pooled and thickened. Whoever was out there remained hidden, but the message was clear.
She was not alone. Agatha swallowed, forcing herself to stay calm. The box, the photograph, the watch, the key, they were hers now. But so was the realization that this discovery had drawn attention. Someone had been keeping watch, and she had unknowingly stepped straight into their orbit. The night held its breath with her. The garden silent, but for the faint whisper of the wind. Agatha knew that this moment, the uncovering, the recognition, and the unseen observer, was only the beginning. She tightened her grip on the box, resolved. Whoever was out there could wait. The answers were here, buried beneath the earth, and she intended to uncover them.
Chapter 5. The past resurfaces. Agatha's slippers tapped softly on the worn stone steps as she approached Miss Sims' house, the little cottage tucked behind the church like a secret waiting to be remembered. Lantern in hand and box cradled carefully under her arm, she felt the weight of the evening pressing at her shoulders. Pippin padded alongside her, silent but vigilant, as if sensing the import of the errand. Miss Sims answered the door before Agatha could knock, a small bundle of energy with wide, knowing eyes behind gold-rimmed spectacles. Her thin gray hair was pinned back in its usual severe style, and her hands trembled slightly as she ushered them inside. "Agatha, dear, whatever brings you here at this hour?" Agatha set the box on the table and lifted the photograph from inside. "I need your expertise," she said softly. "I found this tucked away in my garden. I think you might know her." Miss Sims adjusted her glasses, peering at the faded image. Her hands froze mid-motion, a quiver running through her fingers. Agatha's pulse quickened. "Oh my goodness," Miss Sims whispered, almost to herself. Her voice held a tremor of both fear and awe. "That is Lily Chatterton. Lily Chatterton." Agatha leaned closer. Lily Chatterton, the one who vanished decades ago? Miss Sims nodded, eyes wide, the spectacles slipping slightly down her nose. 40 years, Agatha. 40 years she disappeared, and not a soul could say why or where. People whispered she ran off, that she married someone in secret. Others believed she had knowledge of hidden treasures, or that she was part of something scandalous no one wanted remembered. The room felt smaller somehow, the air heavier with unspoken tension. Agatha studied the photograph again. Lily's face was delicate yet strong, with wide, curious eyes and a faint, enigmatic smile. It seemed impossible to believe that someone so alive on paper could have vanished so completely from the village. "Miss Sims, do you know if she was ever seen near my cottage?" Agatha asked carefully. Miss Sims paled. She gripped the edge of her chair, knuckles white. "Yes, she was seen. The last confirmed sighting before she vanished. It was in the vicinity of your garden, your cottage, or what would later become it. There were rumors she came here frequently, though no one knows exactly why. Perhaps she hid something. Perhaps someone hid her. Or perhaps she fled for her own reasons. No one can say." Agatha's fingers tightened around the photograph. The link was undeniable. A woman missing for 40 years, whose image had surfaced inside a box buried in her garden, with a key and a rusted watch alongside. It was almost too coincidental. Miss Sims's voice lowered further, trembling now as she spoke. "There were whispers, Agatha, whispers that the Chatterton family had dealings, hidden matters, and that Lily may have discovered something. Some said she knew too much. Others claimed she vanished to protect herself, or others from misfortune." Agatha felt a chill run down her spine. The cozy warmth of the cottage, overshadowed by decades of secrets. Every scrap of history, every faded photograph in Miss Sims' collection seemed suddenly alive with significance. "And now it ends up in my garden? Brought back to me after all this time?" Agatha murmured. Miss Sims shook her head slowly. "Fate has a peculiar sense of timing, Agatha.
Whatever she left behind, someone wanted it found, or at least someone knew it would be discovered eventually. Be careful, dear. The past has a way of reaching into the present when you least expect it. Agatha tucked the photograph safely into her coat pocket, her mind racing with questions. Lily Chatterton, lost to time, yet now mysteriously connected to her garden, the buried box, and the strange stranger lurking in Carsley. The sleepy village had revealed a thread, and Agatha intended to follow it, however dark or twisted the path might become. Even Pippin seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, pressing close to her leg, silent and watchful, as if urging her to tread carefully into the shadows of a long-buried story.
Agatha returned to her cottage with the box cradled carefully in her arms, as if it were a fragile heartbeat she could not risk breaking. Pippin followed at her heels, ears pricked, tail stiff with anticipation. She set the lantern on the kitchen table, its warm glow flickering across the wooden surface. Inside the box, tucked beneath the faded photograph, rusted watch, and small key, was a crumpled envelope. It was yellowed and brittle, edges frayed, yet sealed with care. The words on the front were simple: "To whoever finds this." Agatha's heart skipped a beat. Whoever had written it had thought about the future, about someone, perhaps even her, finding it one day. She held the envelope delicately between her fingers, turning it over. The paper had a faint scent of age, a subtle musk that spoke of decades hidden away. The handwriting was elegant, precise, almost musical in its curves and flourishes. Agatha felt an immediate pull, a need to know what had been penned so long ago. For a brief moment she debated showing it to Bill Wong first. Prudence, reason, and caution tugged at her mind. But the lantern's glow, the quiet of the empty cottage, and the pressing weight of curiosity overcame restraint. She slipped her fingers beneath the flap and unfolded the letter. The words were almost lyrical, but each carried a sharp edge beneath the flow. If you are reading this, know that trust is a fragile thing. Betrayal walks closer than you think, and the heart may be led astray by those it wishes to believe. A secret has been kept, a promise broken, and there is a man who cannot be trusted. Do not follow the obvious path. Listen to the whispers of caution, and remember, not all who smile are friends. Agatha read the lines again, slowly, savoring each phrase, while a cold shiver ran down her spine. Betrayal, secrecy, an unnamed man. The words hinted at romance and danger entwined, as if the writer had been torn between hope and fear. She looked at the photograph of Lily once more, the woman's eyes now seeming to peer through time, almost pleading for her to understand. The final lines were abrupt, jagged in contrast to the flowing handwriting. I cannot say more. Do not trust the light alone. Some shadows hold the truth. Beware the hands that dig where they should not. Lily. No explanation, no indication of what had happened after the letter was written, just a voice reaching across the decades, offering a warning and nothing else. Agatha folded the envelope slowly, her mind whirling. The threads of the mystery seemed to tighten around her with every heartbeat. The buried box, the photograph, the pocket watch, the small key, and now a letter speaking of betrayal and a dangerous man. Each clue felt like a step further into a labyrinth carved long before she was born. She placed the letter carefully back inside the box, her fingers brushing against the other items. Pippin nudged her hand with his nose, whine soft and low, almost urging patience. Agatha exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the discovery settle like fog in her mind. The past had reached out to her, and the path forward was obscured. Whoever that man was, wherever Lily had gone, it was clear the secrets were not done with Carsely, nor with her. And Agatha, in her quiet cottage, with lantern light dancing across the walls, knew she was now very much at the center of them.
Chapter 6. A Stranger in the Village. The bell above the shop door jingled faintly as Agatha stepped inside, shaking off the damp chill from the late afternoon mist. the smell of polished wood and faint lavender polish wrapped around it like a comforting shawl. She often visited the village store for nothing more than small indulgences, fresh bread, a jar of honey, or the occasional biscuit. But today, her errand carried a sharper purpose. As she wandered past the neatly stacked shelves, she noticed a man near the counter, speaking quietly with the shopkeeper. He was tall, with dark hair combed back neatly, and eyes that flicked around the room with a careful, deliberate awareness. His clothing was simple but tidy. A tweed jacket over a wool sweater, dark trousers, sufficiently unremarkable to pass unnoticed, except for the intensity with which he scanned every detail. Agatha hesitated near the tea and biscuits, trying to listen without appearing obvious. "I'm researching old land divisions in Carsely, particularly areas with historical disputes or forgotten boundaries. Do you know anyone who might have knowledge of such things?" Agatha felt a subtle shiver, though the shop was warm. The questions were not casual. They carried a precision as if he were hunting for something or someone. She watched him study the shelves and the shopkeeper, measuring, calculating, silently judging. Her curiosity piqued. She stepped closer, pretending to examine a jar of preserves. "That's a rather specific inquiry," she said lightly. "Are you new to the village?" He turned, his gaze settling briefly on her. "Yes, Henry Marsh," he said, extending a hand. "I'm researching local history, primarily for academic purposes. Old disputes, records, land, the forgotten stories that shape a village's present, names, places, secrets." Agatha shook his hand, politely, noting how firm it was. "Secrets, you say? That's ambitious for someone just arriving." Henry's eyes flicked down for a fleeting moment, catching the edge of a photograph peeking from Agatha's coat pocket. His expression tightened, lips compressing slightly. When he looked back at her, he smiled faintly, almost convincingly. "Ambition is sometimes necessary," he said smoothly, though there was a tension in his shoulders that betrayed him. Agatha's detective instincts sharpened immediately. The photograph, the old one, the one from a garden, was not something she had intended to display. Yet the man's subtle reaction confirmed her suspicions. He recognized it, or at least suspected its significance. "So," she said, casual but probing, "what makes you so interested in old land records? Looking for stories or something buried?" Henry's gaze flicked toward the counter and back, his tone polite yet guarded. "Stories often lead to discoveries. Discoveries often lead to more questions. But you're perceptive. Not many notice details like that." Agatha smiled faintly, sensing the tension beneath his civility. "And questions? Do your questions ever have answers? Or are they meant to unsettle people?" Henry's eyes sharpened, a glimmer of acknowledgement passing through his otherwise calm expression. "Perhaps a little of both," he admitted. Then, with a courteous nod, he turned back to the shopkeeper as if closing the conversation. Agatha lingered near the shelves a moment longer, studying him. There was something deliberate, purposeful, and just slightly off about Henry Marsh. He wasn't merely interested in village history. He was hunting for something, and the photograph he had glimpsed had already marked him as someone who knew more than he intended to reveal. As she left the shop, the bell jingled behind her, and she glanced over her shoulder. Henry was watching her, calm, measured, but unmistakably aware. Whatever secrets the village held, she realized, he had found a thread, and he was following it. And Agatha, ever vigilant, knew she would need to untangle it before he or anyone else claimed the story for themselves.
Agatha didn't wait long after her encounter with Henry Marsh. By the following morning, Bill Wong arrived at her cottage, carrying a stack of manila folders that smelled faintly of old paper and dust. His expression was taut, serious, a stark contrast to his usual composed demeanor. "Morning, Agatha," he said, setting the files on the table. Pippin sat alert at his feet, tail stiff, as if he too sensed the gravity in Bill's tone. "We need to talk about what you found and who you met yesterday." Agatha sank into a chair, gesturing to the files. "I encountered a man in the village shop, Henry Marsh. Seemed interested in old property lines. Something about him felt off. Bill nodded slowly. I suspected as much. I went through some old police records, property deeds, and village logs. Lily Chatterton's disappearance wasn't fully investigated at the time, but there were notes, and one name keeps appearing. Marsh. He tapped the top file. Henry's family. Agatha's eyes widened. You mean he's connected to Lily's disappearance? Bill sighed, rifling through the folders. It's more complicated than that. The Marsh family once owned land that included, or at least bordered, the property where your cottage now stands. According to old deeds, the land had been subdivided decades ago, long before you moved in. But the connections between the Marsh family, Lily Chatterton, and that land, they overlap. He paused, looking directly at her. Agatha, that key you found in the box, don't underestimate its significance. It may unlock more than a simple drawer or chest. It could relate to property, hidden compartments, or family secrets tied to the Marsh estate. Agatha's fingers instinctively brushed the small key she had tucked safely into her coat pocket. The weight of it suddenly felt heavier, a reminder that she was no longer merely an observer. Bill continued, voice measured but firm. I advise caution, Agatha. Henry Marsh may seem cordial, even helpful, but given the family connection, we don't know what his intentions are. He could be seeking answers or something else entirely. Keep your distance until we understand more. Agatha nodded, though unease curled in her stomach. I know I should be careful, but it's hard to stay away. Everything is so intertwined now. Lily, the Marsh family, the garden, the buried box. I feel I'm already involved. Bill's expression softened, tinged with concern. You are involved, Agatha, and the deeper you go, the more complex it will become. Just promise me you won't take unnecessary risks. Let me help you navigate this. We need to be methodical. Impulsive action could trigger more problems than we can handle. Agatha inhaled, the gravity of the situation settling over her. The threads of history, secrecy, and personal connection had pulled tight, leaving her poised at the center of a puzzle that spanned decades. She looked down at the key once more, turning it over in her fingers, and felt the weight of responsibility and curiosity. Bill's voice broke through her thoughts, gentle but firm. Remember, Agatha, not everyone who appears friendly is an ally. That includes Henry Marsh. She nodded, a flicker of determination lighting her features. Understood, but I won't stop now. Not when we're this close. Pippin padded closer, resting his head against her knee. Together, human and dog, they stared at the stack of files, the key, and the photograph, aware that the past was no longer buried. It was reaching into the present, and they were caught squarely in its grip.
Chapter 7. The Key and the Truth. Agatha ascended the narrow, creaking staircase to the attic, lantern in hand. The space smelled faintly of aged wood and dust, the air heavy with the quiet weight of forgotten things. Boxes and trunks, stacked haphazardly along the sloped walls, told stories of lives once lived, objects once cherished. Pippin padded silently beside her, tail low, nose twitching at the unfamiliar scents. She had explored the attic many times before, but had never noticed the small, inconspicuous box tucked behind a pile of old linens and moth-eaten blankets. Its brass clasp gleamed faintly under the lantern light, a secret waiting patiently for someone to find it. Her fingers trembled as she drew it forward. Her instincts insisted this was no ordinary discovery. The key fit perfectly. A gentle turn, a soft click, and the lid lifted easily, revealing a collection of brittle, yellowed pages tied with a faded ribbon. Agatha's heart skipped. She recognized the handwriting immediately. It matched the style on the envelope she had found in the garden. Lily Chatterton's diary. Agatha carefully untied the ribbon, setting the pages gently on a nearby chest. She inhaled, trying to steady herself as she read the first lines. They do not understand. If they knew, they would destroy it all. I must be careful.
for my heart and my life are both at risk. Each page drew her deeper into Lily's secret world. The diary spoke of a forbidden relationship, a love carefully hidden from prying eyes. References to secret meetings near the stone wall in her own garden made Agatha shiver. Lily's words were vivid, full of longing and fear, and often addressed to someone she loved but could not name openly. Threats were scattered between the lines, mentions of Henry Marsh's grandfather, warnings whispered in shadowed corners, and veiled ultimatums that hinted of power and influence. Lily had written of feeling trapped, of being watched, of a danger she could neither explain nor escape. Agatha's pulse quickened with each passage. The diary was more than a record of emotions. It was a breadcrumb trail of tension and secrecy, linking the past directly to her present. She felt a kinship with Lily, the sense of urgency and isolation as the young woman struggled against forces too large for her to confront openly. The entries became increasingly fragmented. Lily's pen faltered mid-sentence, smudges marking hurried interruptions. Agatha paused at one particularly chilling passage. "I cannot stay here tonight. If anyone finds me, if the walls themselves could speak, they would—" The sentence ended abruptly, leaving a cold void in its wake. Pippin nudged her hand, low growl rumbling, sensing her unease. Agatha took a deep breath, closing the diary gently and pressing her fingers against the worn pages. Someone, perhaps Henry, perhaps others, had ensured that these secrets remained hidden for decades. And yet, here they were, resurfacing in her hands, tethering the present to a past fraught with danger and betrayal. Her eyes drifted back to the attic window. Moonlight spilled over the garden below, casting the stone wall in silver shadow. That same wall Lily had described in her diary now seemed alive with history. Every scratch and indentation a reminder of events long buried but not forgotten. Agatha realized, with a thrill that mingled with apprehension, that the diary was more than evidence. It was a warning, and just like Lily had feared, someone might still be watching, waiting to ensure that certain truths remained hidden.
Agatha sat at the kitchen table, the diary spread before her like a map of past secrets. The lantern's warm glow illuminated the faded ink, each entry a fragment of Lily's life, each sentence hinting at what had been left behind. She traced her finger along the lines describing secret meetings, whispered warnings, and hurried departures, mentally mapping the locations mentioned. Her eyes lingered on repeated references to a tool shed at the edge of the Marsh family property. Lily had written of hiding something important there, something that must remain undiscovered. Agatha's heart quickened. The shed had long been abandoned, its timber walls weathered, paint peeling, and windows clouded with years of dust. No one in the village ventured near it, and its isolation made it the perfect hiding place. "This must be it," she murmured, her voice soft, as if speaking too loudly might summon unseen eyes. "The last clue." Pippin whined, pacing near the door, ears twitching nervously. Agatha knelt to scratch behind his ears. "I know, boy," she whispered. "It feels like we're on the edge of something important." His behavior only heightened her sense of both anticipation and caution. She carefully packed the diary, the small key, and the photograph into a satchel. Each item felt heavier now, laden with decades of secrecy and unspoken fear. Agatha double-checked the lantern, its flame steady, and tucked her coat around her shoulders. Dawn was still hours away, but she wanted to reach the shed as early as possible, to examine it before any curious eyes or prying strangers could appear. As she stepped outside, the garden was quiet, dew dampening the grass and mist curling along the hedgerows. Pippin stayed close, tail low, nose to the ground, alert to the faintest sound. Agatha inhaled the cool morning air, the weight of the investigation settling around her. Everything was pointing toward the shed. The diary, the key,
Lily's own words. The final piece of the puzzle was within reach. Her mind raced, reconstructing Lily's last known movements. If the diary was correct, and if Henry's family history intertwined with hers, the shed might hold more than just memories. It could reveal what Lily had hidden and why she had vanished. Agatha felt the thrill of impending discovery, tempered by a twinge of fear. Pippin barked softly at a passing crow, and Agatha smiled briefly, despite the tension. "Patience," she said. "Soon we'll know." She glanced back at her cottage one last time. The familiar warmth of home seemed distant now, replaced by the shadow of the marsh property and the secrets concealed within that old tool shed. Her hands tightened on the satchel strap, and a resolute calm settled over her. Whatever lay hidden, whatever danger lingered, she would uncover it. Together, woman and dog moved toward the faint glow of dawn, stepping into the mist-shrouded path that led to the marsh shed. Agatha's mind was alert, her senses heightened, and her determination unyielding. The missing piece of Lily's story awaited her, and she would not turn away. Pippin whined again, low and uneasy, but followed loyally. Agatha gave him a reassuring pat. "Almost there, boy. Almost there." The shed loomed in the distance, shrouded in the pale morning haze. It seemed silent, abandoned, but the air round it hummed with possibility. Secrets eager to be revealed, long hidden in shadow, waiting for Agatha to find them.
Chapter 8. The Dog Who Knew. The dawn mist hung low over the marsh property as Agatha and Bill approached the old shed. The timber walls were weathered and gray, shingles missing in places, but its presence was undeniably commanding, an ancient sentinel over decades of secrets. Pippin padded ahead cautiously, nose to the ground, ears pricked, sensing the tension in the air. "Are you certain this is wise?" Bill asked, glancing at the structure. His usual calm was tinged with concern. "We don't know who might still be around, or what we'll find inside." Agatha adjusted the satchel containing the diary, key, and photograph. "I've traced Lily's last movements as far as I can. The shed is the final location mentioned. Whatever happened to her, or whatever she left behind, is here. We have to see it for ourselves." As they neared the shed, a figure emerged from the mist. Henry Marsh stepped onto the path, coat damp with dew, eyes intent. "Agatha," he said, voice careful but steady, "I heard you were coming here. I need to know the truth, too." Agatha exchanged a wary glance with Bill. "Are you aware of the key, then?" she asked. Henry nodded. "Yes. Only recently did I learn the truth about my grandfather. I want to understand what happened to Lily, and my family's part in it." With a small, deliberate motion, Agatha retrieved the key and slid it into the lock of the shed. It turned smoothly, as though waiting all these years for this precise moment. The door creaked open, revealing a dim interior littered with dust, cobwebs, and the faint scent of aged wood. Agatha bent carefully, lifting one letter with gloved fingers. The handwriting was unmistakable. Lily's. Bill's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the room. "This is where it all happened," he murmured. "A struggle, perhaps. She tried to hide something before whatever befell her." Henry swallowed hard, voice low and faltering. "I had no idea. My grandfather, I never knew he could have been involved. I thought it was just stories. I didn't understand." Agatha nodded, noting the tension in his posture. He wasn't lying. His shock seemed genuine, but the weight of family history hung heavily between them. Pippin, meanwhile, began scratching persistently at a loose board in the shed floor. Agatha crouched beside him, following his motions. The board shifted slightly under the dog's eager paws, revealing a narrow gap beneath. Her breath caught. She said low, heart pounding. She glanced at Henry, who stepped closer, uncertainty and curiosity mingling in his expression. Bill knelt beside her, eyes sharp.
The attic of secrets now seemed to have a basement of its own, hidden beneath decades of dust and concealment. Whatever Lily had attempted to hide, or whatever had been hidden from her, was directly under that board. Agatha's fingers hovered over the gap. The diary and letters clutched tightly against her chest. A tension-filled silence settled over the shed. The wind rustled outside, carrying with it the faint scent of dew and the unknown. All three adults, along with Pippin, were acutely aware that the past had reached forward in a tangible way, and that the discovery could change everything. Agatha inhaled slowly, steadying herself. "Whatever is under there," she said, voice firm yet measured. "We're about to find out." Pippin yipped once, tail wagging slightly, as if urging her onward. The shed, the letters, the torn shawl, and the hidden gap beneath the floor promised answers, and the revelation that the mystery of Lily Chatterton had never truly faded from Carsely. The moment hung suspended, each heartbeat echoing in the quiet shed, as Agatha prepared to confront the final secrets that had been buried for decades.
Agatha knelt beside the gap Pippin had revealed, her hands brushing away decades of dust and debris. The floorboard had shifted easily, as if yielding to the truth it had concealed for so long. Beneath it lay a shallow hollow, dark and faintly damp, its earth disturbed but settled again over time. Bill knelt beside her, eyes scanning the area carefully. "This is it," he said softly. "Whatever was hidden here, it's been waiting for discovery." With gentle persistence, they cleared the remaining soil. Pippin sniffed and nudged the earth with his nose, whine low and anxious, as though sensing the importance of the moment. Slowly, the hollow revealed its contents. Lily's personal belongings, arranged as if in a final, desperate attempt to protect them. The torn shawl, now dirt-stained but recognizable, lay atop the items. A rusted locket, a small bundle of letters, and a folded piece of paper, the last of Lily's messages, emerged from the soil. Agatha unfolded the paper carefully. The writing was hurried, trembling, but unmistakable. "If anyone finds this, know that I tried to escape. He would not allow me freedom. My life, my choices were never mine. Protect what you can. Remember me, but fear not for the truth. It ends here, though I could not survive it." Her hands trembled slightly, reading Lily's final words aloud in the quiet shed. The past, long obscured, had been revealed in its raw and sorrowful entirety. Agatha felt a heavy mixture of grief and clarity settle in her chest. Lily's disappearance was no mystery born of whim or whimsy. It had been a desperate attempt to survive a threat she could not confront alone. Henry stepped closer, his face pale, eyes wide, lips trembling. I never knew," he whispered. "All these years, my grandfather." He sank into a chair, head in his hands, the weight of revelation pressing down upon him. Bill laid a steadying hand on his shoulder. "The truth is here now, Henry. The rest will be handled properly. Files, records, and legal steps. We'll make sure it's all documented, and that Lily's story is finally respected." Agatha gently closed the hollow, covering Lily's belongings once more with care. She stood slowly, brushing dirt from her hands, and glanced at Pippin, who had curled at her feet, tail resting quietly. His job, it seemed, was done. He had led them faithfully to the resolution Lily deserved. A quiet satisfaction washed over her. Though sorrow lingered for the young life lost and the decades of secrecy, there was peace in knowing the truth had surfaced. Justice, however belated, had arrived. Henry lifted his gaze, tears glistening, gratitude and regret mingling in his expression. "Thank you," he said quietly to Agatha, "for uncovering this, for finding her story." Agatha smiled faintly, her heart warm despite the tragedy. "It's the least we could do. Lily's life and courage deserves that much." Together they stepped out of the shed into the soft morning light. Dew sparkled on the grass, and the mist hung lazily in the trees. Pippin followed Agatha closely, tail relaxed, head resting lightly against her leg, a silent companion who had guided them to the truth. As the village awoke beyond the hedgerows, Agatha felt the full weight of closure settle over Carsely. The mystery had ended, the secret unearthed, and the quiet courage of a long-lost woman had finally been honored.